Downtown Springfield, Miller's Family Restaurant, the kind of place where 3 generations of families come for Sunday dinner, where the waitresses know your order before you sit down, and where the American flag in the corner has hung for 40 years without anyone thinking twice about it. It was 6:47 p.m. on a Tuesday evening. The dinner rush was in full swing. Families occupied the booths, couples shared desserts, and the gentle hum of conversation filled the air with warmth. That's when he walked in. Robert Bear Mackenzie, 73 years old, standing just over 6 feet, but somehow seeming smaller than his frame suggested. His gray hair was neatly combed, his flannel shirt pressed, his jeans clean but worn. He moved with the careful precision of someone whose body had endured more than most, favoring his left leg slightly, a reminder of shrapnel from a place most people couldn't pronounce. Bear had been coming to Miller's every Tuesday for 8 years. Same booth in the back corner, same order, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans, and black coffee. He never caused trouble, never complained, never drew attention to himself. He was just there, a quiet fixture in a world that had largely forgotten he existed. The hostess, Sarah, a college student who'd been working there for 2 years, knew him by sight, but not by name. She'd seat him without a word, bring him his coffee, take his order. They never made eye contact, never exchanged pleasantries. It suited them both. Bear would sit in his corner booth, watching the families laugh and talk, listening to the conversations about homework and work stress and weekend plans. Normal life, the kind of life he'd fought to preserve but never quite figured out how to live. But this Tuesday night was different. The restaurant was busier than usual. The local high school football team was celebrating a major victory, and the tables were filled with rowdy teenagers and proud parents. The energy was high, the voices loud, the atmosphere electric. Bear took his usual seat, but this time it felt different. His solitude seemed sharper, his silence more pronounced. He sipped his coffee and waited for his meal, same as always. But tonight, the world wouldn't let him remain invisible. The person serving Bear that evening wasn't his usual Sarah. It was a new server, Tyler. 20 years old, cocky, the type who thought every moment of his life needed to be shared on social media. Tyler approached Bear's table with his phone in hand, distracted by an Instagram story he was halfway through posting. "Yeah, what do you want?" he said without looking up. Bear smiled politely. "Could I get my usual order? The meatloaf? Mashed potatoes?" Yeah, I know," Tyler cut him off. "But we're out of meatloaf today. We've got chicken or fish." Bear paused. In 8 years, they'd never been out of meatloaf. "Chicken then," he said quietly. When Tyler brought the food, he set it down in front of Bear, but this time, he lingered. He pulled out his phone and pointed it toward Bear. "Wow, Grandpa," he said loudly, loud enough for nearby tables to hear. "You still come here, huh? The guy who's been sitting at the same table for like 20 years. Bear shifted uncomfortably. "Actually, it's been 8 years. Whatever," Tyler laughed. "You're like my grandpa. Doesn't like change, just does the same things over and over. I guess that's what getting old does to you." A few people from nearby tables started to look over. Tyler was enjoying the attention. "Come on, Grandpa," Tyler continued. "Let's go viral on social media. Miller's oldest regular customer. Let's get you some followers." Bear raised his hand. "Please, I'd just like to eat my meal." "Aw, don't be so sensitive," Tyler grinned. "I'm just kidding around, but seriously, you should try living a little. Get out there, meet people. Sitting here every Tuesday is pretty sad." At this point, several people at nearby tables were starting to chuckle along with Tyler. He was performing for them, and it was encouraging him to continue. "Maybe you should try to make some new friends," Tyler said, still pointing his phone at Bear. "There are social clubs for old folks. Maybe you could find someone there." Bear looked down at his food. He hadn't touched it yet. He tapped the table gently with his hand. "Could I get my check?" Tyler smirked. "You haven't finished your food." "Could I get my check?" Bear repeated, his voice calm but firm. Bear stood up, pulled out his wallet, and placed a $20 bill on the table. Tyler was still laughing, still filming. "Come on, Grandpa, don't be mad. We were just having fun." Bear looked at Tyler. For a moment, there was a flash in his eyes. Not anger, but deep sadness, just exhaustion. Without saying another word, he slowly walked toward the restaurant's exit. Tyler called after him. "See you next Tuesday." Bear opened the door and stepped outside. Behind him, the crowd was still laughing. What Tyler didn't notice was the woman sitting at a table in the back, mid-40s, wearing cargo pants and a plain t-shirt. She had watched the entire scene, quietly, angrily. When Bear walked out, she stood up too. She pulled out her wallet, left money on the table, and walked toward the exit. Before leaving, she turned to Tyler. "That man," she said, her voice low but clear, "is James Mackenzie. 3 tours Vietnam, 2 tours Iraq. Bravo Company commander, Purple Heart recipient, and you just humiliated a man who bled for your right to be an idiot." Tyler's smile faded. "I didn't know." "Exactly," she said. "You didn't know, And you didn't care to ask. She walked out, leaving Tyler standing there as the laughter around him slowly died down. The woman's name was Captain Lisa Rodriguez, Army Special Forces, recently returned from her 4th deployment. She had come to Miller's for a quiet dinner, trying to readjust to civilian life, when she witnessed the scene that made her blood boil. She stood in the parking lot, watching Bear slowly walk toward an old pickup truck. His shoulders were sagged, his steps even more careful than before. The weight of humiliation was visible in every movement. Lisa pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts. She found the number she was looking for and pressed call. Mike, it's Lisa. I need a favor. Staff Sergeant Mike Torres was at his apartment, 30 miles away, when his phone rang. He and Lisa had served together in Afghanistan, and when she spoke, he knew by her tone that something was wrong. What happened? He asked. There's a Vietnam vet here, Iraq too. Some punk kid just humiliated him in front of a whole restaurant. Called him grandpa, filmed him, made him a joke. Mike was quiet for a moment. What's his name? James Mackenzie. Bear Mackenzie. Jesus Christ, Mike breathed. Lisa, do you know who that is? Should I? Bear Mackenzie saved my unit commander's life in Ramadi. Lieutenant Colonel Jackson still talks about it. This guy's a legend. Within the next hour, the phone calls spread like wildfire through the veteran community. Mike called his old unit. Lisa called her contacts from Special Forces. Each person who heard the story felt the same anger, the same sense of injustice. Bear Mackenzie wasn't just any veteran. He was the kind of soldier other soldiers told stories about, the kind who never asked for recognition, never sought the spotlight, but whose actions in combat had saved dozens of lives over multiple deployments. And some punk kid had just made him a laughingstock for internet clout. By 8:30 p.m., the plan was in motion. It wasn't about revenge. It was about respect. It was about showing a community that had forgotten what real sacrifice looked like, exactly what they had taken for granted. 12 veterans from different branches, different eras, different backgrounds, but all united by one thing. They recognized what Bear Mackenzie represented, and they weren't going to let his humiliation stand. The next evening, Wednesday, at exactly 6:47 p.m., the same time Bear had arrived the night before, something unusual happened at Miller's family restaurant. A convoy of vehicles pulled into the parking lot. Not military vehicles, but the kind of trucks and SUVs that veterans drove. Clean, well-maintained, purposeful. 12 men and women got out. They didn't coordinate their movements, didn't speak to each other, but they moved with the same precision, the same bearing. Some were in civilian clothes. Others wore parts of their old uniforms. All of them wore the unmistakable posture of people who had served. They entered Miller's one by one, spaced about 30 seconds apart. No fanfare, no announcement, just 12 people taking seats at different tables throughout the restaurant. Tyler was working again that night. He noticed the newcomers but didn't think much of it. Just another busy evening. The restaurant filled with the usual dinner crowd. Familia. Normal conversation, normal atmosphere. Then, at exactly 7:15 p.m., the front door opened one more time. Bear Mackenzie walked in. Bear hadn't planned to come back. He'd spent the previous night lying awake, replaying the humiliation, wondering if he was too old, too irrelevant, too forgotten to matter anymore. But something had drawn him back. Maybe it was stubborn pride. Maybe it was the simple fact that Miller's had been his routine for 8 years, and he wasn't ready to give it up. He approached the hostess stand, expecting to be seated in his usual corner booth. But before he could say anything, something extraordinary happened. One by one, the 12 veterans throughout the restaurant stood up. It started with Captain Rodriguez at a table near the window. She rose from her seat, turned toward Bear, and stood at attention. Then Staff Sergeant Torres at the counter. He set down his coffee and stood. Then Marine Corporal Johnson near the kitchen. Then Army Sergeant Williams by the restroom. Then Air Force Technical Sergeant Brown at the back booth. One by one, 12 veterans stood in perfect silence, all facing Bear Mackenzie. The restaurant fell completely quiet. Families stopped eating. Couples stopped talking. Children stopped fidgeting. Even the kitchen staff came out to see what was happening. Tyler, standing behind the register, looked around in confusion. He didn't understand what was happening, but he could feel the weight of it. Bear stood frozen at the entrance, his eyes wide, his breath caught in his throat. He looked around the room at the faces of men and women he'd never met, but who somehow knew exactly who he was. Captain Rodriguez spoke first, her voice carrying across the silent room. Staff Sergeant James Bear Mackenzie, Bravo Company, 1st Battalion, 7th Infantry Regiment, 3 tours Vietnam, 2 tours Iraq, Purple Heart, Bronze Star, Silver Star, 27 years of service. She paused, then continued, "Thank you for your service, soldier." One by one, the other veterans began to speak. "Thank you for Ramadi, Sergeant. You saved Lieutenant Colonel Jackson's life. You saved all of them. Thank you for Firebase Delta, Sergeant. My dad served under you. He never forgot. Thank you for teaching us what it means to lead from the front. Thank you for showing us what courage looks like. Thank you for carrying the wounded when you were wounded yourself. Thank you for never leaving anyone behind." Each statement was delivered with military precision, with respect, with the kind of recognition that transcends rank and time. Tyler watched this scene unfold with growing horror. He began to understand what he had done the night before. He had humiliated a man who had sacrificed everything for his country, who had bled and fought and saved lives while Tyler was playing video games and posting selfies. The weight of his actions crashed down on him like a physical force. After the last veteran had spoken, Captain Rodriguez approached Bear. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small American flag pin. "This was my grandfather's," she said quietly. "He served in World War II. He would have wanted you to have it." She pinned it to Bear's flannel shirt, then stepped back and saluted. The 11 other veterans followed suit. 12 salutes, held in perfect formation, for a man who had spent 8 years eating alone in a corner booth. Tyler couldn't take it anymore. He stepped out from behind the register, his hands shaking, his voice breaking. "Sir," he said, approaching Bear. I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't." Bear looked at him with tired eyes. "You didn't know because you didn't ask. I was being stupid. I was showing off. You were being cruel," Bear said simply. "To someone you decided didn't matter." Tyler's eyes filled with tears. "What can I do? How can I make this right?" Bear looked around the room at the veterans still standing at attention, at the families watching in respectful silence, at the young man who had learned the hardest lesson of his life. "You can remember," Bear said quietly. "You can remember that everyone who walks through that door has a story. Everyone has fought battles you can't see. Everyone deserves basic human dignity." He paused, then continued. "And you can understand that freedom isn't free. The right to mock, to humiliate, to treat people as entertainment, that right was paid for with blood. My blood, their blood." He gestured to the veterans around the room. "Use it more wisely." The manager of Miller's, who had been watching from the kitchen, approached the group. He was a veteran himself, Navy, Gulf War, and he understood what was happening. "Gentlemen, ladies," he said, "dinner is on the house tonight. All of you. And Sergeant Mackenzie, you have a table here for life. The best table in the house." He led Bear to a table in the center of the restaurant, where he could see everything, where he was part of the community instead of hidden in the corner. The 12 veterans joined him, pulling chairs around the table, sharing stories, sharing laughter, sharing the brotherhood that transcends time and circumstance. Tyler spent the rest of the evening learning. He listened to stories of combat, of sacrifice, of loss and survival. He heard about friends who didn't come home, about wounds that never fully healed, about the challenge of returning to a world that had moved on without them. He learned that Bear had been a single father, raising his daughter alone after his wife died of cancer. He learned that Bear had used his GI Bill to become a teacher, spending 30 years educating children about history and respect. He learned that Bear had been quietly volunteering at the VA hospital, helping other veterans navigate the system. He learned that the quiet man in the corner booth had lived a life of service that continued long after his military career ended. Word of what happened at Miller's spread throughout the veteran community, then throughout the town, then beyond. Not as a viral video or a social media sensation, but as a quiet story of respect restored. The restaurant became a gathering place for veterans. Bear's Tuesday night dinners became Wednesday night gatherings, with more and more veterans joining each week. Tyler remained on staff, but he was different. He learned every veteran's name, learned their stories, treated them with the respect they deserved. He became Bear's protégé, learning about military history, about sacrifice, about the true cost of freedom. Bear never spoke about what happened that night. He didn't need to. The pin on his flannel shirt said everything that needed to be said. But something had changed in him. He was no longer invisible, no longer forgotten. He was part of a community that valued his service, that recognized his sacrifice, that understood his worth. The town of Springfield was different too. People began to notice the quiet veterans in their midst. They began to ask questions, to learn stories, to understand what they had been taking for granted. 6 months later, Tyler was accepted into the Army. He wanted to serve, to understand what service meant, to earn the right to stand alongside the men and women he had learned to respect. Before he left for basic training, he visited Bear one last time. "You changed my life," he said. Bear smiled. "You changed your own life. You just needed to understand what was worth changing for." Tyler nodded, then asked the question that had been bothering him for months. "Why did you come back that night? After what I did to you, why did you give me a chance to make it right?" Bear was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "Because that's what we do, son. We don't leave anyone behind, not even those who hurt us, especially not those who hurt us out of ignorance instead of malice." As Tyler prepared to leave for the army, the 12 veterans who had stood up for Bear that night gathered at Miller's one more time. They presented Tyler with a gift, a challenge coin, engraved with the words, "Earned through understanding, honored through service." "This isn't for what you're going to do," Captain Rodriguez explained. "This is for what you've already learned. The hardest lesson a soldier can learn, that true strength comes from protecting those who can't protect themselves, and true honor comes from admitting when you're wrong." Tyler took the coin with trembling hands. "I won't let you down." "You already haven't," Bear said quietly. "You've proven that it's never too late to choose respect over ridicule, understanding over ignorance, service over self." This story isn't just about one night in a restaurant. It's about the invisible battles that surround us every day. It's about the quiet heroes who walk among us, unrecognized and unappreciated, carrying the weight of their service in silence. It's about the power of brotherhood, the importance of respect, and the truth that some bonds can never be broken, especially when they're forged in the crucible of shared sacrifice. Bear McKenzie didn't need 12 veterans to validate his worth. His service spoke for itself, but he deserved to be recognized, to be honored, to be seen as more than just an old man taking up space. How many Bear McKenzies are in your community? How many quiet heroes are sitting in corner booths, shopping in grocery stores, walking past you on the street, carrying stories of sacrifice that you'll never know unless you take the time to ask? The next time you see a veteran, young or old, male or female, visible or invisible, remember this story. Remember that behind every uniform, every service pin, every quiet demeanor, there might be a story of heroism that deserves recognition. You don't have to organize a dozen people to make a difference. Sometimes all it takes is a simple thank you. Sometimes all it takes is seeing someone as a human being instead of an inconvenience. Sometimes all it takes is asking their story instead of assuming you know it. Bear McKenzie returned to Miller's every Tuesday for the rest of his life. He never sat in the corner booth again. He sat at the big table in the center of the room, surrounded by friends, surrounded by respect, surrounded by the understanding that his service mattered. Tyler completed his military service and returned to Springfield, where he opened his own restaurant. Above the door, he hung a sign. Everyone has a story. Everyone deserves respect. And in the corner of the dining room, he kept an empty table with a single place setting, a folded flag, and a simple sign, reserved for those who served, because some lessons, once learned, should never be forgotten. If this story touched you, if it made you think about the veterans in your own community, share it, not for views or likes, but because these stories need to be told. Because respect, once lost, must be fought for to be regained. And if you know a veteran, any veteran, take a moment to listen to their story. You might be surprised by what you learn. Until next time, remember, freedom isn't free, respect isn't automatic, and heroes often hide in plain sight. They're the ones sitting quietly in corner booths, waiting for someone to see them as more than just an old person taking up space. Don't let them wait any longer.